Hi, everyone. So I see everybody filing in on the participants list. We'll just let that populate for the next few minutes so that, well, just in case internet connections and stuff like that. Okay. So for the folks at home, not checking my email, I am going to be managing Q&A and things like that as we progress through this discussion on the phone so that I'm not tapping away on the computer. Yeah. Okay, so it's morning here on the West Coast, which means that we'll probably be getting people chiming in as we continue, and that's fine. But it's evening out in the Middle East. It's 8 p.m. out there. And I'd like to introduce two friends of Get Global. They've been speakers at Get Global, partners with Get Global on the, let's see, with the orange background. I'm colorblind. I think that's orange. We have Bilal. Wave for us, Bilal. Bilal Sabuni. We met Bilal when he was the executive director and CEO of the American Business Council in Dubai, which is the American Chamber affiliate there. They count as their members, everyone from Lockheed and I think, the likes of IBM and UPS and so on, all the way down to local companies, big ones, small ones, and they play a critical role connecting the business community out there. So that's his background. He knows a lot about all kinds of business needs and what folks are up to in Dubai and the broader Middle East. And now he's with a company called GuidePoint, which helps companies, investors of various stripes to get specialized knowledge from experts in all kinds of niche areas. He's a great guy. Say hi, Bilal. Why don't you introduce yourself, and then I'll introduce Sturgios.
Okay. Yep. Hi, everybody. It's really a pleasure to be here. Julian, can't thank you enough for allowing me onto the platform. I think what you're doing is absolutely phenomenal. It's as good as any time to be circulating and disseminating knowledge, particularly in this time when knowledge and insight is rare to come by. Yep. Hi, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are. I am Bilal Sabuni. As Julian mentioned earlier, I'm the regional head of the New York intelligence and knowledge services firm GuidePoint. I'm the former CEO of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce office in Dubai.
Excellent. And then we have Sturgios Voskopoulos, who is the CEO of Kanu Capital. Kanu Capital is the investment arm of the family conglomerate Kanu Group, which is an absolutely enormous family conglomerate group in the Middle East. They have investments across multiple verticals, not only around the Middle East, but around the world as well. A lot of that is, of course, in equities and things like that, but in hard business as well. So tremendous investments and assets in shipping, logistics, the infrastructure. I'll let Sturgios continue, but his vantage point at Kanu Capital gives him deep insight into major happenings across the region, both just involving business issues, but also the background economics and financial health of a lot of what's going on out there and its connection to the world around it. Sturgios?
Thanks, Julian. Hi, everyone. My name is Sturgios Voskopoulos. I'm a Greek national living in the Middle East for the past 15 years. Again, Julian, thank you. Thanks a lot for setting up this webinar. I think the Get Global in its real essence, right? So connecting people from all over the world and discussing specific topics that matter and that are important for all of us. So yes, I've been in the region for the past 15 years, working in asset management mainly, but also being an entrepreneur myself. So I have been living in Bahrain for the past 15 years, also in Dubai, between Asia and the Middle East. for 5 years. So yeah, I have, I think, a very good grasp, like Bilal does, of the region, the dynamics, how the last decade has evolved, where we are today. So it's a great chance for me to share know-how, thoughts with all of you, and I'm very open for discussion. Thanks, Julian, and nice to talk to Bilal.
Thank you both. So I think what everyone's curious about right now is what has changed. There were a lot of events and incidents over the last year or so, and a lot of events that were scheduled to be happening this year and beyond, that this virus coming in and surprising everyone has, it's caused a lot of upheaval. So one event that was coming up was Expo 2020, which, when Get Global had done an event in Dubai with Bilal in 2017, even then everybody was talking about it. And so there's chatter that could get postponed, perhaps likely to be postponed by a year. But then there was also the complications with the United States and Iran, several countries that were struggling economically, like Lebanon, and just regional tensions causing business questions that the rest of the world were already starting to ask. For instance, Saudi Arabia. So a lot of the region is dependent on travel and tourism. A lot of the region is supported by oil prices. That had also been hit hard in recent weeks. So I'm going to turn first to Stergios to help us understand the economic background here and what he's seeing from where he sits. Stergios, what do you think of this?
Well, I mean, the region, as you all know, geopolitically had always its own risks. So since I moved here in 2005, I moved in the midst of the crisis with Iraq and Afghanistan after 9/11. So the region is very used to it, right? So it's nothing new, all the geopolitical as it started this year with Iran and the rest. And at the same time, all the governments in the Gulf, especially, they have their 2030 plans in terms of transformation, in terms of diversification. I mean, we all know that the region has grown and has been what it is because of oil, because of, it's a hydrocarbon-based economy. However, since also, I mean, I'm experienced and I'm on the ground in the region, I've seen lots of diversification. I've seen new industries coming on board and governments pushing on that perspective. So all the fiscal budgets since, like a few years ago, from United Arab Emirates to Saudi to Bahrain, Kuwait, Qatar, and Oman, also moving towards this diversification. This shock, I mean, even before the shock, we saw that there was some correction in the market. GDP growth has not been there. So we were all expecting some more growth coming from new sectors, not only driven by oil and gas. So now here we have a double whammy event coming within a month, right? So we have the coronavirus shock, and then we have also the oil crash. It comes at the same time. So many things changed. The whole landscape is changing here. So the economies have to strive through this big challenge in the region. It's not only the coronavirus that halted all the business. I have to say that the government here reacted fast in terms of the spread of the virus. So they closed the borders. In a way, they stopped flights. And that's why we don't have such a big spread. I'm not sure about seasonality of the virus, maybe that's another factor here. However, we have economies that halted, and we don't know for how long more. And this has a big impact. Also, the global demand, right? So this is another factor on the oil price. So we are monitoring this as well. Everyone is expecting a recession that we were not expecting before, and this has a huge impact to economies. However, also as a group, we're trying to navigate through this by facing the risk, by managing the situation, but also seeing what comes after. So now it's about recession economics for all of us. It's not only in the region, it's all over the world, but also we need to see what comes after that. It's the post-coronavirus era, right?
Yeah, I'll follow up on some of those points in just a moment, but before we, drill down, I'm curious about how Bilal would answer that question. What do you think, Bilal?
Well, I guess let me kind of also share a more current snapshot of the current situation where we're at now. And I'll also kind of talk a little bit about GuidePoint and in a little bit more detail, because I think some of the work that we're doing is actually quite relevant in engaging the sentiment economically. We work very much behind the scenes supporting our clients with the intelligence and insight from our massive kind of network of industry and subject matter experts across 190 countries. And so we can be considered a barometer, because when we're very busy, our clients are very busy making investments and expanding operations. And so I have some findings from the team here that were just submitted, which I'll get into a little bit in a little bit more detail. But before I go into all of that, let me just kind of take a couple minutes to share with the attendees and participants a quick macro snapshot of the local and regional environment. Of course, like many cities and countries around the world, precautionary measures are in place here and in Saudi Arabia and across the region to limit the movement of people and enforce social distancing. Our malls, restaurants, gyms, and other entertainment venues like cinemas, nightclubs, bars, pools, beaches, parks, they've all been closed since about the middle of the month and continue to be closed for an indefinite period. And more recently, there was a nationwide disinfection program here in the UAE, which got kicked off and remains in effect until the 5th of April, as the country kind of literally washes itself down with disinfectant. There's a very firm nationwide restriction of movement outside the home between 8 in the evening and 6 in the morning here to allow for the disinfection campaign on the streets and in public spaces. In Saudi Arabia, the curfew has been recently tightened and is now enforceable between 3 in the afternoon and 6 in the morning. There are limited exceptions for emergencies, but other than that, it's pretty much a complete lockdown here. During the day outside the lockdown hours, the public have been asked to continue to stay home unless they really need to leave for essential reasons. And there are certain exceptions for workers in what is deemed to be vital sectors like healthcare, utilities, police, banking, and others. There are now fines imposed for persons leaving the house for unnecessary reasons, and a number of highly publicized cases of people being arrested for flouting the rules and actually encouraging disobedience have been seen. On March 26th, a circular was issued by the UAE government mandating that all private sector companies and commercial establishments, excluding those said pharmacies and grocery stores, adhere to implementing a very strict remote work structure for at least 80% of their employees up until the 9th of April. A similar notice was published by the DIFC, the Dubai International Financial Center, which is where GuidePoint and our staff are based. And we've received similar directives to implement the same 80% work from home structure.
So,
yeah.
So in terms of what you're seeing across your network with GuidePoint, what kind of background noise are you perceiving? Where's the urgency, the kind of expertise that's in demand? What prompted you to use that as a signal?
Well, I mean, if you look at, for example, so we serve different sectors, right? Our clients are broadly put into 4 large buckets: consulting, the investment community, corporates, and government. And so if you look at the consulting business, which again is us serving the top consulting firms of the world and their regional government and corporate end clients, that business is actually up 14% month on month from last month. Now, that was a bit of a positive surprise as we were forecasting for the figure to be down as much as 20%. So it was a stark differential of about 34% from where we had expected to land and where we are today, which is very welcomed and a pleasant result from the Middle East, which is largely driven by the UAE and Saudi. But we feel that, the real test may come April and onwards. We may now just be kind of still flying on the fumes of a very strong beginning to 2020, and that there may be some slowdown in April.
Okay. And is there any particular kind of information that is just kind of popping out as an unusual or interesting need?
Well, yeah. So everybody's very caught up with the current situation, and very few people are looking beyond that. But we do see some very kind of forward-thinking organizations and leaders that are looking well past this pandemic and into the future. But those that are looking at the near to midterm, they're looking at their business models. They're reevaluating their operating models. There are gyms that are beginning to look at leasing their equipment and going online with their trainers. There are, fashion and apparel brands that are looking at developing face wear, as they're calling it now, to kind of take advantage of the crisis, not in a kind of in an ill sense, but looking at the opportunities that may arise for them. We see very large companies like Dyson, for example, which are famous for their vacuums and their cool bladeless fans. They're now creating ventilators and selling those to the government in the US and abroad. So I think our clients are on the corporate side are utilizing us for expertise into how to evolve and develop their business models to cope with the current situation and what may be a kind of a long-lasting kind of midterm.
So I'm going to try to take it from the commanding heights and the behavior around the economic drivers. The government, of course, in most of these countries is like a prime figure, and drill down from there into the experience of the consumer and regular business folks. So Stergios, you mentioned recession economics. What have we seen before in the behavior of the recession economics playbook? How have folks used that, and what are the sort of knee-jerk or go-to habits of the prime economic figures across the region, and what are you expecting to see as a result of that?
So you refer now to this situation today, right? About
right.
Coronavirus.
And so going back to what you were discussing regarding recession economics during your segment a moment ago,
sure.
What is the playbook, and I mean that both from an economic and historical perspective, but also from a cultural one. What are the go-to reactions from the primary economic figures out there?
Well, there is uncertainty. We don't know about the duration of lack of demand and lockdown. So that's a big, unknown. So therefore, we need first at the company by company level, because we have also a large portfolio of companies here. So it's a chain of things within the economy that we start seeing already, right? In terms of cash. So all the companies need to make sure that they have cash visibility. Therefore, they need to work out their own business models. Is about first the costs, and then is about revenue defense. So the revenue defense comes to play now in the mid to long term. The short term is mainly, how do I deal with this? Is it going to be like 2 months, 3 months? And don't forget, right? I mean, we missed here in the Middle East, in the Gulf, the peak, which is February, let's say March and April. Now we have the Ramadan coming in May, and then the summer season. So, and we have also major industries like transportation, aviation, that is on the ground, and that has an impact. So we have first, for all companies across the board, and different industries to make sure that there is cash visibility, that all the companies can live and go to the worst case scenarios, and then to see how do we come back, right, when the economies rebound.
So when I look at the, history of large-scale crises across the Middle East, you look at MERS, you look at the financial crisis, you look at the collapse in oil prices a few years ago. There's enough there for us to start to discern what is likely to happen. Does the government take a proactive approach in each of these areas? I mean, we're already seeing that with Saudi Arabia, seeing that with UAE. They seem to be focusing on liquidity in the companies that they're dealing with. Is that mostly targeted toward large companies, or do they also focus on small and medium-sized ones as well? So I think what I'm trying to understand is what comes first in the mind of a treasury official or someone operating fiscal and potentially even monetary policy out there.
Yeah, it's about giving them, rest to the companies. So, all the different stimulus that we've seen so far from Saudi, UAE, even in Bahrain, it's about allowing the companies to operate for the next 3-6 months from a fixed cost perspective, right? So let's say there's no business or it's very limited business. You need to keep the SMEs to survive, which is very important. You don't want to have people to be laid off, let go, even though this starts happening, but at a very, very minimal level. So the government has been there, the different governments in the Gulf have been there from the beginning.
Mm-hmm. Bilal, what do you think?
Yeah, stimulus is certainly being talked about quite extensively here. And in fact, just in the past few hours, news hit the wires here that Emirates Airlines and one of its main shareholders, which is the ruler of Dubai, he's announced kind of an equity injecting equity injectment into Emirates Airlines to ensure its viability through the stormy weather. So yeah, there's billions of dirhams allocated for SMEs, and for the larger companies, certainly there's equity yes, equity there to be injected in by the ruling family.
So what about the sovereign wealth funds? I mean, there are a few gigantic ones out there. How are they likely to behave through all of this? Are they going to see this as a big opportunity to start, buying things up? Are they going to focus inside the region, outside the Middle Eastern area? How have they typically behaved?
Well, from my angle, we also work with the largest sovereign wealth funds in the region, and we haven't seen a significant slowdown in their activity from our standpoint, which is interesting to note. The price of oil is extremely scary. We are flirting with the $20 line, and there's talk about $10 oil. I mean, we haven't seen these numbers in many decades. Demand is at near zero with people at home and no planes flying around. And this certainly weighs heavily on the region's sovereign wealth funds. But as we are today, we haven't seen a significant reduction in our clients' activity.
Stergios, speaking on behalf of a major investor in the region, what's your psychological constitution right now?
Yeah, either you are a sovereign wealth fund that your major revenue stream is oil and gas in the region from Saudi to Kuwait, UAE, and Qatar. So with this price correction that you have seen, they also need to manage their own revenue, and the spending. So, but we see that eventually they will come back and be more aggressive in terms of investing abroad, but very selectively, because they have also to manage their own budgeting at this oil price of $20. It depends, right? Is it going to be 20 for the long term, or is is it going to rebound? Because you have still the low demand on oil. However, the sovereign wealth funds, like any investor like ourselves, we see that wherever there is a correction, there is an opportunity, but not aggressively, right? We need to see where is this going. However, we pick some sectors, we pick certain areas, geographies where we would like to be active, but we keep following, right? I mean, we're still in the beginning or in the midst of the storm. And, but yeah, I mean, there will be good investment opportunities out there.
Okay. So cautious for now, but keeping an eye out. So bringing this down to the level of business operation and consumers, how have consumers across the region typically behaved in moments like these? I mean, when you look at Lebanon and Beirut, for instance, they were famous for partying at the height of the war, right? So in some ways, everybody's used to this, and folks just carry on and do what they want to do. Do you see that as particularly Levantine behavior, or is this something that everyone just kind of gets on with? So behavior, consumer behavior. What does this mean for those guys? Bilal, what have you seen?
I think the situation weighs heavily on consumers and individuals. It was kind of an already kind of tough year coming out of 2019, which was also quite tough. There was a lot of kind of optimism, new year, new decade, 2020, Expo, a lot of good indications. The war in Yemen here in the UAE was winding up. There were, again, the Qatar GCC issue, there were rumors about that kind of coming to an end. There were a lot of positive signals. So, the consumer community was kind of beginning to kind of come out of a dark period. And the last thing that they really needed was this, the pandemic. So with the pandemic and absolute uncertainty about what tomorrow will bring and whether or not people's jobs are going to be there, I think there's quite an understandable hold on people's wallets. People are not spending. And that kind of is a fear for governments, which are trying to stimulate economies and trying to encourage positive sentiment across the investment community and consumer behavior. So it's going to be an interesting kind of a few weeks coming up to see if in fact people kind of do see a light at the end of the tunnel, or if they're going to kind of be much more cautious in their approach.
What do you think, Stergios?
I think that's a very unique situation we're experiencing right now, right? It's an unprecedented crisis. I mean, we never in our lifetime experienced like such a pandemic that had a global spread. So humans are humans at the end of the day. There are different norms and cultures across the world. So Asia reacted, faster, and that's why the curve of spread was flatter, because they had the experience from before, from SARS. Others in the Western world, like in Europe or US, they reacted differently, and that's why we had the spread of the virus. But at the end of the day, when there is a shock, I mean, the first thing you're going to cut from is consuming. And this time is different. It's not like, okay, I understand there is a war in Lebanon. Like, I mean, culturally, you don't care. You go out and you party. But this time we have the social distancing. This is something unique that we all experience, right? We don't go out, we don't interact with people. So this has a large impact to the consumer behavior, and it will all depend on the duration of this uncertainty. I don't see people coming back soon to be ready to consume. I think the first thing that you would do is to catch up with people, to go out maybe. Again, it's not going to be back to normal. I don't expect that from F&B to consumer products to luxury, right? I mean, it's going to take years to come back to the same.
Wow. What are savings like across the region for middle class and, well, mostly middle class, but do people tend to keep nest eggs? I'd
Yeah,
imagine
there's
that they
no,
would.
I mean, the only good thing, yeah, the only good thing here is that compared to US or even Europe, people don't borrow too much. I mean, I will let also Bilal to share his thoughts, but that's what I've seen so far. Even corporates, you know, they're not like, you don't see the leverage you will find in the Western world. That's why the recession might not be as harsh as it might be in US and Europe because you have leveraged corporations in this world. And now we're talking about the recession to be prolonged, driven also by credit. So we have, I mean, the Fed, we have the central banks and governments provide all the liquidity. But, you know, I mean, at the end of the day, corporates are adding to their balance sheet. Like this is debt. So unless you are ready to be able to, I mean, you are ready to generate revenue again, as before, this is going to be a big problem. In the region, we will not have this problem. I mean, it's not going to be a leverage issue. It's going to be a growth and going back to the demand dynamics we had issue. That's my thought.
So we've got some interesting people on the video conference right now. I want to open up some questions. Do we have any folks who have things that they want to ask? Hit me up in Slack. We got one. Well, we've got two from Whitney. First, Bilal, are you seeing reactions vary from region to region? Because you're in Turkey, North Africa, and then also the Middle East. So I think that gives you a wider view on how different folks are handling things, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, reactions, I guess, are more driven by government and how strictly the government are kind of coming down. And I assume we're talking about the current pandemic, the COVID situation. Okay. Yeah. I mean, if you let people be people, I mean, the Middle East, Africa, this region is largely the same. People will go out, people will have fun, people will engage. It's a very social region. The difference lies in how the government is reacting, their speed, and their firmness. So in the UAE, there's an absolute kind of no nonsense, strict enforcement of rules. A lockdown is a lockdown, and there are fines, penalties, jail terms, which are being enforced and being publicized as examples. In other parts of the region, it's the governments have been less inclined to come down as heavy on their citizens for various different reasons. But yeah, I think that is the difference in the region here. It just purely boils down to government reaction.
Okay. We have another question from Whitney. What about unemployment? Is all of this staying stable? Is there a similar sort of good corporation template that folks are following by announcing, hey, we're not going to be laying anyone off for now? Like, what is the sort of pan-cultural, but also, you know, corporate position on these kinds of things right now? Bilal.
I can talk about Gulf. So, I mean, so far within the yeah, I'm sorry.
Oh, that's all right, Stergios. I was going to do one and then the other, so.
Sorry, Bilal. Very quickly, so, I mean, as Bilal said, right, the reaction from the governments was very quick, very fast, and very determined. So for many months, the corporates and the SMEs will be actually covered by the government. So this will not allow them to go out and start cutting costs by just letting people go. So I don't see, there will be unemployment, right? But there will be, here we have this unique characteristic, which is expats and locals. So I don't see the unemployment hitting the locals, but you will see more expats leaving the region. And, but altogether, I don't see the unemployment rates to rise as I expect it to be in Europe and US.
What do you think,
Bilal? I don't know what's Bilal's view.
Yeah, no, I tend to agree. I mean, there's this great trend, which is mostly a Western trend of these large, you know, Fortune 100, Fortune 500 CEOs coming out saying that nobody's going to be laid off. We don't have that as such. So there is some fear, particularly across the retail sector, hospitality sector, anything related to tourism, to aviation. And these are key drivers of our economy. There's a lot of fear. There's a lot of uncertainty. As I mentioned earlier, the stimulus package has not trickled down. Dirhams haven't landed in people's pockets yet. So until that starts, and until there are, public assurances, or at least company-wide assurances that nobody's going to be laid off because said company is being taken care of by the government, there is going to be fear. And with an 85% expat community, fear can sometimes lead to people very strongly considering going home, home being anywhere in the world. And that, again, is something that this country is very unique in. And it's something that is, a very big concern, because, if the expats leave tomorrow, everyone, you're left with 15% of the population. And it would not be a sustainable economy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So we have an econ nerd question from Vernon about inflation. I mean, with all the stimulus, but then the collapse in demand, and then oil prices weighing into this, I mean, that's three factors all affecting inflation. Anybody have a smart answer on where that's likely to go? Sounds like I don't know.
A Sturgio's question.
Sturgios, what do you think?
We have noticed, to be honest, inflation will be driven mainly from supply constraints when it comes to the basic stuff like food already. There have been some small increases on products and goods.
Yeah.
So that's where I see actually the inflation hitting. I don't see any big inflation risk in the meantime, because demand, is going to be weak anyways.
So you're saying category specific, not necessarily headline inflation affected?
I see that food
or
security
deflation.
is a big issue. Yeah, deflation, no, I don't think so. We'll see like the normal levels of inflation where it stands today with the small variance. But on certain areas like food, food security is a big issue here. So now with all the, banning and transportation constraints that we have, you might see some supply issues that drives prices up. But it depends again on the duration, of this lockdown. But I see it more short term and long term, unless we're moving to a U recession, U rebound situation where this will last for a year or two.
Yeah.
I think we had some folks on the line yesterday with the China discussion, and there are parts of the world where there wasn't really anything structurally wrong, but I guess in the Middle East, there's just a lot going on there that that is structural and temporal for the moment, right? For Sheila, she is asking, Bilal, you mentioned that the demand for consulting has grown recently. What other sectors have there been decreased demand within?
Decreased?
Oh, sorry, increased demand. Sorry.
So across our segments, we've seen, consulting has grew by substantial, which is great for the economy, because they're serving their clients who are here in this region, typically the public sector agencies and large corporates, who then are responsible for a lot of employment and driving the economy. So that's a great sign. Our government and corporate business has single-digit increased, and that is just kind of month on month. It could be a standard fluctuation. The institutional sector, I don't want to kind of, Sergios has already kind of recapped that here. And then we have very small sectors, but all in all, looking at the average across all of our clients, we have not seen any COVID impact. Now, what could be and this I would need to drill down in the numbers a little bit more. But there could be some dips which are not, we would need to kind of reveal by looking at the numbers in greater depth, so those dips could be covered up by the increased business that we're doing on the back of COVID. So, corporates, governments, across the board, all of our clients are using GuidePoint and our experts to reveal insights into their industries and into their sectors and how they are being impacted by the virus and how they should develop new models around their businesses and how, for example, a transaction which is in the final stages of closure, how the industry is going to be forecasted and impacted for the next 6 months, year, 2 years, 5 years. So that level of scrutiny on our numbers needs to be taken. It's still month end and we haven't crunched those yet, but we can certainly try to release some more figures down the line. Okay.
I want to remind everybody, please ask any questions in the Slack channel because that's where the conversation is happening. And that's where I'll be looking for all of this. So, because we want you guys to talk to each other as well. We've got some folks who have a lot of experience in the region out there, and of course, Bilal and Sturgios can follow up with each of you there as well, and you can ask them questions on the platform. Let's see here. Expo 2020 was a huge regional economic driver. Certainly Dubai was all over that. We touched on this a little bit earlier in the call, but it's really alarming that this could get postponed. I mean, we were looking at what? I mean, billions of dollars coming into this was just a huge economic driver. What do you think the impact from that will be, and who's going to be hurt, and what kind of opportunities should we be talking about for when things come back around for the folks who were not readers of our first expert guide? I'm referring to something that we published on our website that, focused on all kinds of areas of opportunity for Expo 2020. But Bilal, what do you think?
So Expo 2020, just for those that aren't aware, is a pretty big deal here for the country and for the region. It is a massive kind of exposition. It's the World's Fair. It is government to government involvement, where countries around the world will come into Dubai and kind of display their the good and the great of what they have to offer in terms of product and services. As Julian, you mentioned, billions of dollars were being poured into this project, from sponsorship to infrastructure, employment, technology, so on and so forth. And this was set to launch really in October of this year. And so where we are today is that the organizing committee of Expo 2020 in Dubai has gone to the BIE, the Bureau of International Exhibitions. And they're basically going to request, based on the current situation and based on the fact that they have been approached by countries asking for postponement, they're going to request that the BIE puts a vote to their member nations to basically collectively agree to postpone by 1 year. Now, if you ask me, the past month or more, I'm sure that the Expo folks were extremely busy looking at each and every single one of their contracts, looking at what sort of legal pain they may be experiencing in this postponement, looking at any kind of force majeure clauses, and looking at, and basically having conversations with all of their stakeholders to ensure that everyone is on board. This is not a cancellation, which is very good. It's just a postponement, and so we don't think that the impact will be as large. Of course, there will be some people that were time bound and they will be affected by this 1 year postponement, but by and large, it won't be as bad as a cancellation.
Just a second ago, we had one of our lawyer partners on here who a lot of their work is force majeure, and we may end up doing a session just on that for these large events. So let me see my other questions. What are the smartest companies that you guys are seeing doing right now? Like, is there anyone that you've been seeing handling this either from a communications perspective, marketing, workforce, realignment of business models, where you just kind of think to yourself, wow, they are really doing this right. And what are they doing?
Yeah, I
We
mean,
have seen companies. Sorry, Bilal, go ahead. Go ahead.
no, please go ahead.
Not that very quickly. I mean, I have two examples. Of course, it's still the beginning, right, of the crisis. So I think day by day, more and more people are trying to reimagine and realign, adopt to the new norms. But for example, we had a company that is doing mainly delivery of food for corporates to office towers in Dubai.
Mm-hmm.
So they changed like in few days the whole model by changing the algorithm in the app well. So now they can deliver in large residential towers. So you need to be innovative and very creative in situations like this. By also going to who needs something like cybersecurity. We see there is another company that we have exposed, right? So we see that with all this digital overload that is happening even in the region, more corporates would like to look at risk management from any cyber risks that arises. So we saw companies that go for pilots because they have human power idle, and they say, instead of sitting, or doing nothing on new projects, let's actually be a bit proactive and see how we can preempt corporates by explaining to them what is cybersecurity. And they do it, as a pilot project because the resources are there. So we see more innovative ideas on the digital world than anywhere else, but day by day also on the traditional business, from travel to, because we are also exposed to travel, right? You need to be creative here now. And I think that the post-COVID era will be a new era. We'll have new norms. So you need to start adopting to the new norms from today. And many companies, are more creative than others.
What do we think about luxury?
I'm not very positive. I will let Bilal.
Bilal?
Yeah, I mean, luxury, the only example that I have is that there are some luxury brands and kind of pivoting and looking at introducing product lines which are around facewear, so designer facewear. And not just any kind of designer facewear, but those functional, actually, designer facewear implementing the latest medical technology. So it's an interesting marriage between luxury designer wear and the medical community. They're talking about kind of how smart companies are navigating the crisis. There's a funny meme that was going around. I'm sure a lot of people have seen it, but it basically says, who is responsible for your company's cloud transition and digital transformation? Is it your CEO? Is it your CTO? Or is it COVID-19? And really kind of COVID-19 is large push that a lot of companies out there needed to get their digital transformation process going, to get their operations put up into the cloud, and for them to be much more scalable down the line when things kind of recover.
We've got a couple more questions. From a food and beverage retail, and this is from Katie from That's It. So from a food and beverage retail specific perspective, have certain channels been hit harder than others? For example, in the US, consumers are turning to club and avoiding convenience. Food service has always been hit hard and had to adapt to delivery services. What does the current retail landscape look like? So I'm assuming this is from both a absent COVID-19 situation and then introduction of and comparison of the two.
Yeah. So the F&B, I mean, like everywhere, right? It suffers right now. The physical F&B. There are companies here like Talabat or others who are doing very well because there is delivery. To me, it's that simple for now. And F&B will not come back as it was, especially Dubai, and Bilal can comment on that. F&B has been growing exponentially over the past 5 years. I don't know what Dubai F&B will be after the COVID. It's not easy for many of these setups to be back healthy financially.
Hmm.
Yeah, in the UAE, I mean, as Sergio was saying, F&B and retail was growing, at a really rapid rate for year on year for many years, and kind of we kind of see ourselves in oversaturation in terms of our retail segment, F&B, and so I mean, even before the COVID situation, there were several kind of stories of different outlets and different companies closing, or we were seeing also a consolidation in the market. COVID-19 is not going to add to, it's not going to help the situation. Kind of remains to be seen as to the end effect. But yeah, I think with the country and the region on lockdown, no malls allowed to open, no commercial establishments allowed to open. Sales are at absolute zero. I mean, this will be a stress test to a lot of business models, a lot of P&Ls, and yeah, it remains to be seen how long this situation is going to last. I mean, I think that's the biggest question. If we can emerge out of this by May, because that's when it kind of starts to really get hot here in the region, and if the heat kills off the virus, and we'll come back to some sort of semblance of normality. And I say some semblance because at the end of the day, we're a country that relies, and the region actually relies on the rest of the world. We're not self-sufficient. We need to have tourists coming in. We need to have visitors in our shopping malls. We need to have people, kind of intermingling and traveling and creating business opportunities. So if we are out of it by April, May because of the heat, but the rest of the world is still, deep in the pandemic, we won't be allowed to open our borders. We won't be allowed to allow commercial aircraft to kind of come in, and we will still suffer.
Yep, I agree.
So I'm gonna ask two quick questions. We've only got about 7 minutes left, but I want to get the quick take on both of these. The first one is, and then I'll turn to both of you. There's only one thing that's correct about forecasts, is that they're almost always wrong, right? But it helps to understand, where folks think that things are going sometimes, because, every now and then they might be right a little bit or something like that. So with that as like sort of an outline for what to expect, what do you both see? Bilal, what do you think?
Well, I don't want to be the bearer of bad news. I mean, I spoke about how we see, I mean, us as an organization, as the bellwether of the economic climate, seems to be okay, but, maybe just fumes that we're running on. On a personal level, and not predicting for the region's economies to bode well, it's in particular, it's because of the deadly combination of the ongoing COVID situation, coupling with the dramatic drop in the price of oil. This is a killer combination that cuts all the major revenue streams for most of the major economies that drive this region. What's interesting to note, though, I mean, gold is at a 7-year high. It's at, $1,600 an ounce. However, Russia has signaled a cease in its purchasing of gold. And so that kind of is going to play into that. All the rest of the commodities, it doesn't look very good. So yeah, I mean, near to midterm, big question mark from my side.
Stergios, the long view from where you sit.
Well, the long view is that it will come back, but we don't know how soon, right? And back to normality and the new normality, I would say. The issue here in the region is that lots was driven by the transformation plans from all different countries, especially Saudi. So, you know, as you may know, Saudi opened socially also over the past year. So there was too much happening. I mean, I went to Riyadh a few times and I saw like a new city. And that was a big, good momentum, as Bilal mentioned, right? So to us, that was a major driver that Saudi is opening to the world. It's the major economy in the region. That was also had a very positive impact to the other countries, especially Bahrain, which is a neighbor. And with oil.
Uh-oh.
Yeah.
Lost Sergios at a very interesting moment. We will come back to oil. So the other question that I had was, what does this mean outside the region? What does this mean for the world? You had a lot of really big financial players investing in all kinds of things to be able to diversify the economy and away from oil. And it was a lot of really interesting economic behavior. Any idea on how that's going to change or if it's going to change? I would assume that the urgency to change that would be quite high, but what do you think? And I'll repeat the question in just a minute for Sergios.
I'm back. Sorry, I got disconnected, I think, right? Or...
Well, you know what, Bilal, let's put that question on hold and come back to what Sergios was saying. You were talking about the price of oil in the context of Saudi's behavior.
Oh yeah, I was talking about the transformation plan, right, for 2030.
Right.
That there was a good plan, and that would have a very positive impact to Saudi, but also the surrounding countries and the Gulf in general. But I want to see the duration of you know, the oil price at that level, and also of the COVID. So these two factors will have a large impact to our projections for the regional economy.
Yeah, and for the folks who are listening in, there was just so much activity going on in Saudi Arabia. They were building entire cities from scratch. The transformation in the region was just enormous. Most people operating in the region had their eyes firmly on what was going on in Saudi Arabia, no matter where they were sitting. So, you know, that was not only just a lot of opportunity across, you know, but people would have money in their pockets. I mean, there was just a tremendous amount of money going around inside the country into visible things and transformation. So what Sergios just said, I think, is interesting in that context. Let me see. Oh, so Bilal, what this means for the rest of the world as diversification in the Middle Eastern economies is, I guess, put in question. Folks were investing in oil, or investing in their economies and in technologies and in various aspects of those economies away from oil dependency. It was leading to all kinds of interesting things, from, you know, extraterritorial investments like in Silicon Valley, SoftBank, key technologies, and then different kinds of energy. What do you expect is going to happen with all of that?
You know, I don't think anything will change. I think, if anything, this is further proof that the region's governments need to diversify away from their dependence and their reliance on petrochemicals, oil and gas. It was already a stated mission by all the countries in the region for them to diversify away from oil. They realize that oil is finite, and they're using the current oil revenues for this, you know, diversification campaign that you talk about. The diversification campaign not only is kind of those investments externally and abroad in energy and in SoftBank and in interesting fund sectors and paintings and things, but it's also, they're funneling some of that revenue back into the country and developing very future-proof infrastructure, roads, transportation models, connectivity, hubs, ports, It's all kind of a very cohesive part of a master plan. And what's really nice and great to see is that a lot of the region's governments are coordinating together. So the coordination between Saudi Arabia and the UAE is phenomenal, and kind of by default, Bahrain and Kuwait and the rest of the GCC countries are also kind of involved in that master plan. But yeah, I mean, if you ask me how things are going to be impacted, no, they're going to continue investing abroad. They're going to be continuing doing their research, identifying the right sectors that matter most to them, and their growth and their prosperity going forward.
Sturgios, what are you looking at?
We're looking at technology, right? We're looking at, as I said, we also want to see what comes after. We need to diversify from oil and gas, not be too dependent, and see new things on healthcare, technology, energy efficiency, sustainability, more vital sectors and areas where we can develop things. I mean, also as a group, but in general, there is always the trend of tech transfer. So invest in companies in US or Europe and see how you can bring these models, business models and technologies and adopt in the region or customize for the region. So that's where we're looking at. And, you know, we're very open with new ideas from Europe, Asia, Silicon Valley, US, as you know.
Mm-hmm. Right, right. So from the horse's mouth, we have that. And we are at our hour limit. We're actually a minute over. But this was a fantastic conversation. I'm so glad we got to do it. We are really lucky to have two people with so much insight on the inside and the goodwill to share what they know with the Get Global community and the COVID Response Network. So thank you so much, both of you. I really appreciate it. And it's nice to hang out, catch up a little bit, have a laugh, even in dark times, especially in dark times. So any parting comments?
Let's do it again in 1 month to see where we are.
You know, nothing from my. Yeah, I just want to thank you, Julian, and all the work that you're doing. Get Global has been a fantastic partner in the past, and what you're doing here with the COVID Response Network is truly something very kind of notable and noteworthy. And I wish you all the best with it.
Thank you both so much. So we'll see everybody in the Slack group. Let's keep the conversation there going. No reason why we can't keep asking questions. They're both in there. So we'll talk to you then. Thanks a bunch, everybody.
Thanks, Julian. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Bilal.